my daughter-in-law stole my credit card. The next day, I opened my statement, over $53,000 spent on luxury items and a lavish getaway. And then on Monday, I got a text. Loving the gifts, mom-in-law red heart. I smiled to myself, because the card she used wasn't really mine. But we'll get to that. Stick with me to the end, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. My hands shook as I stared at the credit card bill, the numbers swimming in front of my eyes, blurred by tears I refused to let fall. $53,000. Spent in just one day. My heart pounded against my chest as I scanned the transactions, each one more outrageous than the last. Tiffany & Co., $18,000. Cartier, $22,000. Luxury spa escape, $3,500. First-class flight to Paris, $9,500. I collapsed into the kitchen chair, the one Harold and I had shared our morning coffee in for nearly 4 decades, before cancer stole him from me 3 years ago. The statement felt cold in my hands, but my cheeks burned with shame. How had I been so naive? So trusting? And as much as the money stunned me, that wasn't the worst part. No, the worst part came in a text message, bright, cheerful, and cruel. Thanks for the treats, Zuri gemstone. I read it again, my chest tightening. The mockery in her tone. The assumption that I'd just accept it, because I was old, or fragile, or too desperate to keep peace to ever push back. My phone buzzed again. Another message. Tyson and I are having the time of our lives in Paris. You have to see the view from the sweet smiling face with heart eyes. Photos followed. There she was, grinning in what looked like a 5-star penthouse, decked out in diamonds I'd never be able to afford. In one picture, she lifted a champagne glass and a playful toast. The bracelet on her wrist sparkled like it was laughing at me. I put my phone down and walked to the window, looking out at my little backyard. The one Harold had filled with rosebushes before he got sick. I've been caring for them alone ever since. Just like everything else in this house. It's quiet now. Too quiet. But it's mine. Or so I thought. That credit card was tucked away safely in my wallet. Or I thought it was. When did Zuri take it? Last Sunday. She'd insisted on helping with the dishes after dinner. Gave me a warm hug before she left, close enough to reach into my purse without me noticing. The memory made my skin crawl. I'd mistaken manipulation for affection. And I had tried so hard to win her over. 3 years of marriage to my son, and I'd gone above and beyond to be kind to her. I'd complimented her outfits. Told her how much I loved her cooking. Agreed with her even when she cut me down with snide remarks. When she hinted I was forgetful in front of Tyson, I laughed like it was a joke. When she rolled her eyes at my stories about Harold, I stopped sharing them. When she said my house looked stuck in another decade, I seriously considered remodeling. All of that, just to stay close to my son. My only child. The boy who once ran to me crying over scraped knees. The man who clutched my hand at his father's funeral and said, "I'll always be here, Mom." But somehow, I'd lost him anyway. The phone rang. Tyson. For a split second, hope flared in my chest. Maybe he found out. Maybe he was calling to make it right. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, steadying my voice. "Hey, Mom." His tone was off. Distant. Cautious. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." My heart dropped. "Of course, darling. What's going on?" "Zuri told me you offered to pay for the anniversary trip. She said you wanted to treat us, but now you're upset about the amount." His words hit me like a punch. So that was her game. She hadn't just stolen from me, she'd laid the groundwork to make me look like a forgetful old woman. And worse, Tyson believed her. "Tyson," I said, choosing each word carefully, "I never gave Zuri permission to use my card." There was a pause. "Mom, seriously?" She showed me messages. Ones where you told her to go all out. You said it was your gift. What messages? I snapped, unable to stop myself. Maybe you forgot. You've been under a lot of stress lately. And Dr. Peterson said grief can mess with memory. Dr. Peterson. Our family doctor of 15 years. When had Tyson even talked to him? I remember perfectly what I've said, and what I haven't, I said, voice sharp now. Someone used my credit card without permission. That's called stealing, Tyson. Another pause. Longer this time. Let's just talk about it when we get back, okay? I don't want to ruin our trip over a mix-up. A mix-up? I repeated, unable to keep the anger from rising. $53,000 is not a mix-up. I heard him falter. Wait. 53? Zuri told me it was only a few thousand. Hotel and souvenirs. Neither of us said anything after that. I could feel something shift in his voice, a fracture in the story Zuri had fed him. Tyson, I said quietly, when you get home, check your wife's suitcase. Check her jewelry box. And then ask yourself, does that look like a few $1,000s? I ended the call before he could reply. My hands trembled as I set the phone down. But the silence that followed wasn't the same as before. This wasn't the ache of an empty home. This was the quiet after a line had been drawn. This was the empty ring of betrayal. 3 years. That's how long I'd spent trying to earn affection that was never being offered, attempting to win approval from someone who only ever saw me as a convenient wallet. But as I stared at that credit card statement, the pain gave way to something else, something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Something sharper, steadier. I sat up, reached for my reading glasses, and began scrutinizing each transaction. Because there was one thing Zuri didn't know about that credit card. Something that might just turn everything around. I didn't sleep that night. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw Zuri's smug little grin from those Paris photos. Heard the veiled insults in her voice from so many dinners I'd hosted with love, only to be treated like an afterthought. How could I have been so blind? How did I let this go on for so long? It all started flooding back, like the floodgates had finally burst. The first red flag should have been their wedding day. Somehow, Zuri had forgotten to reserve me a seat at the family table. I spent the entire reception seated beside Harold's distant cousins, watching my son dance with his new wife, who carefully avoided looking in my direction. Just a mistake, Tyson had said gently later, when I brought it up. Zuri was overwhelmed. You get it, right, Mom? Of course, I'd said I understood. Because I always understood. That was my mistake. Then came the subtle ways I was left out. Oh, we were just snapping a quick photo. Zuri would chirp when I noticed I'd somehow missed every group picture. We'll take one with you later. But later never came. And on social media, the narrative was clear, a perfect little couple, with no mention of the woman who raised one of them. I thought about that first Christmas after their wedding. I'd spent weeks hand-knitting her a luxurious cashmere scarf in her favorite shade. She unwrapped it, held it up like it was a used dish rag, and said, "How sweet. I'm sure someone will enjoy this." Then she tossed it aside. Months later, I spotted it shoved in their closet, still sporting a Goodwill tag. But the memory that pierced deepest, one I hadn't let myself fully feel until now, was this past Mother's Day. I'd invited them over for brunch. Spent the whole morning cooking Tyson's childhood favorites. Zuri walked in wearing a new designer dress, immediately whipping out her phone. "This is so vintage," she said, snapping pictures of my food like it was part of a history museum. Nothing like old-fashioned cooking from the elder generation. She made it sound like I belonged in a dusty archive, not in the kitchen I'd nurtured my family in for decades. And Tyson? He laughed along with her, not noticing how her every word chipped away at me. That same day, she began laying her next trap. "We've been looking at bigger houses," she said, slicing her pancakes into precise squares. "Something more updated, and secure. Then her eyes swept across my cozy little home, the place where Tyson grew up, where Harold and I built a life together for nearly 4 decades. Of course, she added, tilting her head in mock concern, we'd want to live nearby, to help when Agatha needs us. When? Not if. When? Older people shouldn't live alone. It just isn't safe. I'm doing fine on my own, I'd said softly. Oh, I know you think you are, she replied, still smiling, still cutting her food. But things change so fast at your age, memory issues, slips, medication mix-ups. Tyson and I worry about you constantly. And there it was. The shift. I saw it in my son's eyes, the look of quiet calculation. He was no longer seeing his mother. He was evaluating me. Assessing my competency. The seed had been planted. Zuri had been nurturing it for months. I remembered the time she offered to organize my purse while I was in the restroom. Later, she laughed about how confused it was. I remembered how she started speaking extra loudly to me in stores, like I couldn't hear. The way she'd whisper to Tyson that I'd told that story before, even when I hadn't. Little drops of poison, day after day. Then there were the financial suggestions, always disguised as care. Agatha, have you thought about setting up autopay? It's easier at your age. Maybe we should find you a financial planner. Someone to take that burden off your shoulders. You could add Tyson to your bank accounts, just for emergencies, of course. I resisted most of it. Some instinct told me to hold my ground, even as I wore down under their endless suggestions masked as kindness. But what truly broke me was how Zuri weaponized my grief. Every time Harold's name came up, she'd turn it into a display. Patting my hand like I was a fragile relic. Whispering to others when she thought I couldn't hear. It's so sad. After older people lose their spouses, they tend to drift. Reality gets a bit blurry. It's completely normal. But it's something to watch. And that's when I saw it. Plain as day. Every act of kindness I'd shown her had been used to build a case against me. Every display of independence had been painted as recklessness. Every expression of love, proof I was naive, soft, vulnerable. That night, at 3 a.m., sitting at my kitchen table, I opened my laptop. And I did something I should have done months ago. I checked every bank account. Every credit card. Every statement. And what I found made the blood drain from my face. This wasn't the first time. Over the past 6 months, there were charges I hadn't made, cleverly scattered, carefully spaced. $800 at a trendy restaurant, on a night I ate leftovers alone. $1,200 at a spa I'd never even heard of. Boutique purchases. Luxury department stores. Small enough to slip under the radar. Frequent enough to be deliberate. Someone had been dipping into my credit cards for months, quietly, methodically, like testing the edges of a fence to see where it might give. That $53,000 spending spree in Paris? That wasn't a spur-of-the-moment splurge. It was the grand finale of a long-running con. As I scanned through the statements, something else jumped out at me. Something that made me pause, sit back, and stare at the screen with a growing mix of dread and cold resolve. The card used for most of these unauthorized transactions wasn't one of my personal accounts. It was linked to an account I'd nearly forgotten still existed, the corporate credit line for Whitmore and Associates, the consulting firm Harold and I had built from scratch 3 decades ago. After Harold passed, I had quietly stepped away from day-to-day operations. I never shut the business down officially, it had seemed too final, but I wasn't actively managing it anymore either. Tyson had stepped in to help close out the remaining projects, tie up loose ends. He'd been added to the account years ago to handle business expenses. Which meant, technically and legally, every charge Zuri had made on that card wasn't just stealing. It was corporate fraud. And I remembered enough from running a business to know corporate fraud carries teeth. Bigger ones than petty theft ever could. I closed the laptop, leaned back, and stared at the ceiling as the pieces fell into place. For years, I'd been playing the peacekeeper. The fixer. I'd kept my head down, choosing to compromise, to keep the peace with my son, even as his wife slowly chipped away at me, both emotionally and financially. But Zuri had slipped. In her arrogance, she'd used the wrong card. A card tied to an active business, one with financial oversight, legal protections, and audit protocols. And most importantly, a business that was still registered in my name. For the first time in a long while, a smile crept across my face. Not the strained, polite smile I wore at family gatherings, but something sharper. A smile with an edge. If Zuri thought she'd been toying with a helpless, aging widow, it was time she learned the truth. This widow had built a seven-figure company from nothing, negotiated million-dollar contracts, and held her own in rooms full of men who underestimated her. She'd simply been dormant. Now, she was waking up. The next morning, I opened my closet and reached for something I hadn't worn in years, my navy blue Armani suit. The one Harold bought me to celebrate our 10th year in business together. It still fit, snug at the waist, shoulder pads just right, though it felt foreign after so many months of cardigans and elastic waist pants. I pinned my silver hair into a sleek twist, touched up my makeup, and looked at myself in the mirror. Not a grieving widow. Not a fragile burden. But Agatha Whitmore, co-founder, strategist, fighter. And I was done playing nice. My first stop was the downtown office tower that Whitmore and Associates had called home for 25 years. I still had my key, though I hadn't set foot inside in over a year. The glass doors opened to the familiar lobby. Maria, our longtime receptionist, looked up from her desk, surprise flashing across her face. "Mrs. Whitmore. I didn't know you were coming in today." "Good morning, Maria," I said with a nod. "I need access to the company files. And I'd like to speak with Jennifer." "Is she in?" "I'll call her right now," Maria said, already reaching for the phone. "She'll meet you in the conference room." Jennifer Morrison, our trusted financial advisor of over a decade, stepped off the elevator moments later. Her expression was unreadable, but I caught the faintest flicker of worry in her eyes. "Agatha," she said gently, "it's been a while. Everything all right?" "I need to review the latest activity on the company credit cards," I said evenly. "Especially the last 6 months. And I'd like a full summary of our audit obligations and fraud policies." Jennifer's brows lifted slightly. "Has something happened?" "There may be an issue," I said calmly. "I'd rather look through the paperwork first." She led me into the conference room. So many memories lived in that space, Harold and I closing deals, mapping growth strategies, dreaming big. The room had seen victories and setbacks, and sitting there again brought me back to life. Jennifer laid out the most recent financial reports across the mahogany table. Together, we began combing through the charges. What I'd found the night before had only scratched the surface. The trail of unauthorized spending stretched back 8 months. Starting with small transactions, slowly ramping up as no one questioned them. Jennifer tapped the paper, tracing a line of expenses with her pen. "These here," she said, frowning. "They're all listed as business-related, but I don't recognize these merchants." I scanned the list. Spas. High-end fashion houses. Gourmet food deliveries. Boutique hotels. None of them made sense for a company that was no longer taking clients. Zuri hadn't just been careless. She'd gotten bold. And that would be her downfall. Designer labels. Spa retreats. Upscale dining. Nothing that even remotely passed for legitimate business expenses, especially for a consulting firm in the process of shutting down. Jennifer's voice was steady but grim as she reviewed the spreadsheet. The card used for most of these charges was issued to Tyson Whitmore, listed as an authorized user. He was granted signing authority as part of the transition plan we discussed last year. She paused. "But it's obvious he's not the one using it." I pulled out my phone and tapped on a photo, Zuri in Paris, smiling for the camera, a diamond bracelet glinting on her wrist. "That bracelet?" I said, turning the screen toward Jennifer. Charged to the company card 3 weeks ago. $18,000. Categorized under client entertainment. Jennifer's face darkened. Agatha, she said slowly, if someone is using company funds for personal purchases and disguising them as business expenses, this isn't just unethical. It's criminal. This is corporate fraud. I nodded. What are we talking about? Legally? Federal offenses, potentially. The IRS doesn't play around when it comes to misuse of corporate accounts, especially if false records are involved. This could lead to fines, prosecution, even prison time. And reputations? Destroyed. Her words hit like thunder, but beneath the dread was something steadier, relief. At last, there might be real consequences for what Zuri had done. But the pit in my stomach reminded me, those consequences might hit Tyson too. And I wasn't sure how much he knew. So what's our next move? I asked. We have to report this immediately. The company must protect itself. Waiting only increases liability. I'll start compiling documentation and alert our legal team. And Tyson? That depends. If he was aware and complicit, he's equally liable. If he genuinely didn't know, he might avoid legal consequences, but he'll still be held responsible for failing to monitor the account. I looked down at the paper spread across the polished wood. My son's name at the top of every statement. Did he know? Had he really not noticed what Zuri was doing? Or had he chosen to look away? I need to speak with him first, I said quietly. Before we go any further. Jennifer hesitated. 24 hours, she said at last. Agatha, I get it, he's your son. But we have legal obligations here. 24 hours, I repeated firmly. Then we take action. She gave a reluctant nod. But I'm freezing the account today. No more transactions. I spent the rest of the afternoon in my old office, making calls and digging through years of files. By sunset, I had the full scope of the damage, and a plan. Zuri had siphoned off nearly $75,000 over 8 months. Every purchase documented. Every lie traceable. That night, I did something I'd never done before. Using the spare key Tyson had once given me, I let myself into their house while they were still overseas. I wasn't there to collect more evidence, I had enough. I was there to understand. To see how they lived. How they thought about money. What they'd been building, and at what cost. Their home was breathtaking. Immaculately styled, expensively furnished, filled with artwork and imported decor. A wine fridge stocked like a showroom. But as I moved from room to room, another story emerged. Bills. Everywhere. Some unopened, others marked past due, piled on the kitchen counter like silent accusations. Credit card statements with balances higher than what Zuri had stolen. Mortgage notices months behind. Letters from their dealership about missed payments on her luxury SUV. They weren't just living beyond their means. They were sinking, fast. And my company's money had been their life raft. In the bedroom, I found Zuri's jewelry box. Massive. Ornate. It looked like it belonged in a museum. Inside were the spoils of her deception. Diamond earrings from March. A pearl necklace from April. A tennis bracelet from May. It was a timeline of theft, each item a trophy. But it was the bottom drawer that chilled me. Tucked away was a folder labeled Financial Planning. Inside. Property reports outlining the value of my home. Copies of Harold's obituary, with his business history underlined. Search histories on inheritance law and power of attorney protocols. At the very bottom was a single handwritten note in Zuri's neat, deliberate script. Timeline, confirm signs of memory decline. Get added to accounts by summer. POA by Christmas. Full control within 18 months. My hand shook as I read it again. 18 months. She'd been laying the groundwork for over a year. Not just to steal, but to take everything. The credit card charges were only the opening act. She had been planning to wrest control of my finances, my assets, and everything Harold and I had spent our lives building. I snapped photos of the entire folder with trembling fingers, the flash of my phone almost loud in the silence. Then I replaced everything exactly as I had found it. Back home, I poured myself a glass of Harold's favorite scotch and settled into his leather chair. This wasn't about jealousy. Or drama. Or even theft. This was a hunt. Zuri had picked me as her target, seeing a vulnerable widow ripe for manipulation. But she'd made a fatal miscalculation. She had underestimated the woman Harold had built a business with. The woman who had held contracts, met deadlines, and outmaneuvered competitors for 3 decades. The woman who had been quiet for too long. Now, she was wide awake. A woman who knew the language of contracts, understood the power of leverage, and had spent a lifetime mastering the quiet art of negotiation. And now, she'd just realized her opponent had been playing checkers, while she was about to open with a queen's gambit. My phone buzzed. A message from Tyson. Flying home tomorrow. We should talk. I smiled as I typed. Yes, we should. Come by Sunday evening. Bring Zuri. There's something we need to go over, together. I hit send and finished Harold's scotch. Sunday was going to be enlightening. The evening arrived with a crisp edge in the air, the kind of autumn chill that made you appreciate the quiet heat of a well-used kitchen. I'd spent the day making pot roast, Tyson's favorite. The same home-cooked meal I'd made every time he came home since he was a boy. But tonight wasn't about comfort. Tonight was about clarity. They arrived right on time. Zuri swept in, radiant in another unmistakably designer outfit, likely funded with money she had no right to touch. Her diamond bracelet glinted as she leaned in for a hug, the same one I'd seen listed on the company card statement. You look amazing, Agatha, she cooed, her voice dipped in honey. I hope you weren't too stressed while we were away. I know you can get anxious when you can't reach Tyson. A perfect little dig, soft, condescending, delivered with a smile. It was meant to reinforce the story she wanted the world to believe. That I was fragile. Dependent. Easily rattled. I gave her a warm nod and played along, for now. So glad you're home safe, I said. Dinner's ready. At the table, I watched my son carefully. He looked weary. Tense in a way that hadn't been there before Paris. His eyes kept flicking between Zuri and me. Something had shifted. So, tell me about the trip, I said, passing the pot roast. The photos were lovely. Zuri lit up, launching into an animated rundown of their luxury hotel, the food, the boutiques. Every detail was dripping in extravagance, yet somehow, she danced around the topic of cost. The suite had these stunning floor-to-ceiling windows, she said, slicing her meat delicately. And the shopping, Agatha, you would have loved it. So refined, so chic. I'm sure, I replied evenly. My gaze flicked to her wrist. And that bracelet, it's gorgeous. She held it up, letting the diamonds catch the candlelight. Oh, this old thing? I've had it forever. Though I may have picked up a few new pieces while we were there. You know how it is, when in Paris. The lie slid off her tongue with polished ease. I glanced at Tyson. Did he catch it? His expression was unreadable. Actually, I said, setting down my napkin. I've been reviewing some financials. A few things stood out to me. Odd charges. Large ones. Zuri froze for a moment, just a flicker, before her smile returned. Oh? What kind of charges? Credit card transactions. I don't remember authorizing them. I'm starting to wonder if someone might have gotten access to one of my cards. The air tightened. Tyson lowered his fork, turning toward his wife. Zuri, didn't you say Mom gave you permission to use her card for the trip? Her eyes flickered. Just once. Then, her mask settled again, soft, indignant, hurt. Of course she did, she said sweetly. Agatha, don't you remember? You insisted. You said it was our anniversary gift. That Harold would have wanted you to be generous with family. My heart clenched, not from guilt, but recognition. She had just weaponized Harold's memory. A masterstroke of manipulation, designed to cloud my judgment. But not this time. That's interesting, I said calmly. I reached behind me and pulled a folder from the sideboard. Because the card you used wasn't one of my personal ones. I spread the documents across the table like cards in a high-stakes game. These are statements from Whitmore and Associates, the consulting firm your father and I built together. The company is still active. Still subject to federal regulations and audits. Tyson went pale. Wait, Mom, I thought the business was shutting down? It is, I said. But not dissolved. Which means every charge made on that card must be a valid business expense. I pointed to the Paris hotel line item. Explain to me how a luxury suite in the 7th arrondissement counts as consulting. Zuri's composure slipped. Just for a second. This is absurd, she snapped. You're blowing a simple mistake out of proportion. $75,000, I said. That's not a mistake, Zuri. That's fraud. The word echoed through the room. Tyson pushed back from the table, his chair scraping the floor. 75,000? You said 53 on the phone. That was just Paris, I said. It's been happening for months. I opened the second folder and laid out more statements, dates, amounts, merchants. March 15th, Lou Bernardine $800. March 22nd, Elizabeth Arden Spa $1,200. April 3rd, Nordstrom $2,600. Each charge was a pinprick, and Zuri was visibly deflating under the weight. But Tyson? He was rising. You've been using Mom's company account all this time, he said, his voice low, dangerous. Zuri faltered. It wasn't supposed to be a big deal. She has so much money, and the business just sat there. And you thought that made it yours? I asked softly. The kind of business that could land both of us in federal prison if the IRS decides this looks like a coordinated fraud scheme. Tyson's voice rose with panic and disbelief. The business I'm still listed on. The business I'm legally tied to. Zuri, do you even grasp what you've done? She snapped back instantly, her voice turning sharp and defensive. What I've done? What about her? Sitting on all that money while we're drowning in bills. Living in that huge house alone while we can barely keep up with our mortgage. She's your mother, Tyson. She should want to help. By stealing from her? Tyson barked, standing and pacing toward the window. By disguising personal expenses as business charges? By making me complicit in a felony? I sat in silence, watching the moment unravel, equal parts sorrow and release. My son was finally seeing the truth. Finally seeing her, but it was unraveling everything he believed about his marriage. There's more, I said softly, pulling my phone from my pocket. I tapped open the gallery and handed it to him. Photos of Zuri's handwritten plans. Notes. Timelines. Calculations. I found these at your house. Tyson scrolled through the images, each one hardening his expression. When he reached the page marked timeline, he let out a laugh, dry and humorless. Power of attorney by Christmas, full access within 18 months. He looked up at Zuri, and I saw it, the exact moment his love for her died. You were planning to take everything, he said, voice flat. Not just from my mother, but from me. Once you had control of her estate, how long before I was no longer useful to you? Zuri's face flushed. Her perfect exterior cracked. It's not like that. I love you, Tyson. I was doing this for us, for our future. No, he said, steel in his voice. You were doing this for you. You've been lying for months, maybe longer. gaslighting me into thinking Mom was confused, incapable, that we had to step in. He turned toward her fully. You made me question my own mother. She was never there for you, Zuri hissed, her voice trembling with fury. Always working, pawning you off on babysitters. She doesn't deserve your loyalty. Stop. The word cracked across the room like a whip. Tyson's face was hard as stone. Don't you dare speak about my mother like that. She worked herself to the bone to provide after Dad died. She built that business from nothing. She paid for my education. Gave us everything. Everything we had, Zuri muttered bitterly. And now we're about to lose it all, aren't we? The house. The cars. Everything, because you can't say no to your precious mommy. I stood slowly, feeling the full weight of my 65 years, but also the strength of every one of them. Actually, Zuri, I said, my voice calm but absolute, that depends entirely on what we do next. They both turned to me. Tyson. Hopeful. Zuri, calculating. I've spoken to the legal team at Whitmore and Associates. A formal fraud report hasn't been filed, yet. This can still be handled privately. Quietly. With full repayment, interest, and consequences. No charges. No investigation. Zuri narrowed her eyes. What's the catch? Smart girl. She knew there'd be one. I looked at Tyson, saw Harold's honesty alive in his eyes. The same unwavering moral compass that made me fall in love with his father. The catch, I said evenly, is that it ends now. The lies. The manipulation. The entitlement. And yes, there will be consequences. I felt the balance shift. The dynamic that had been taken from me now returned, like a tide pulling back toward shore. For the first time in years, I wasn't the grieving widow people tiptoed around. I was Agatha Whitmore. And I was done being anyone's victim. The silence in the dining room was taut as wire. Zuri sat rigid, her designer dress now looking more like armor that had failed her. Tyson stood by the window, his reflection barely visible in the night-dark glass, bent beneath the weight of truth. Zuri spoke, voice cold and thin. What kind of consequences? I crossed to my desk and returned with a manila folder. Inside were the documents that told the story she tried to erase, contracts, receipts, reports, and paper trails she didn't think I'd find. First, I said, taking my seat again, you're returning every single thing you bought using company money. The clothes. The handbags. The jewelry. I have photos and receipts for all of it. Zuri instinctively touched her diamond bracelet. That's not possible, she snapped. Some of it was gifted. And most of it, I've already worn. Then return what you can, I said coolly. And pay full retail value for what you can't. She glared at me, the mask now completely gone. With what money? You know we don't have that kind of cash. Then figure it out, I said. Sell the car. Get a job. Cut back. Live within your means. I opened the folder and slid out the top page. Because the alternative is a full federal fraud investigation. And frankly, Zuri, I don't think orange suits you. Tyson turned from the window, his face drawn and weary. Mom, what else? You said consequences, plural. This was the hardest part, the moment I'd both dreaded and prepared for. I pulled out a second set of documents, my hand steady. Zuri will sign a promissory note for the full amount taken, plus accrued interest and penalties. That totals $78,467, to be repaid over 5 years at standard interest rates. Zuri's voice shot up, nearly breaking. That's over $15,000 a year. We can't possibly manage that. You should have considered that before you decided to bankroll your lifestyle with company funds, I said, tone firm and matter of fact. But that's not all, I continued. You'll also sign a written admission acknowledging your misuse of company assets. I'll keep that statement on file, in case we ever need clarity again in the future. The color drained from Zuri's face. Her flawless makeup couldn't hide the fear. "You're trying to ruin me." "No," I said, my voice calm. "You did that all by yourself. I'm just making sure you can't hurt anyone else the way you hurt me." Then I pulled out the final document, the one that would cut deepest, but was absolutely necessary. "And you'll agree to have no further contact with me. No birthdays. No holidays. No dropping by. From this moment on, you stay away from my home, my company, and my life." Zuri bolted to her feet, her chair screeching across the hardwood. "You can't do that. You can't just cut me out of the family. What about Tyson? What about future grandkids?" I looked at my son. There was pain in his eyes, but beneath it, something else. Relief. Like a man finally freed from chains he hadn't realized he wore. "Tyson is my son," I said softly. "He'll always have a place here. But you have made it very clear that you can't be trusted. And I won't allow you to keep poisoning my life." Zuri began pacing, agitated and defensive, like an animal backed into a corner. "This is madness. You're destroying our marriage over money, over a misunderstanding." "I'm not ending anything," I said evenly. "I'm protecting what your father and I built, our legacy. You're the one who's been dismantling this family for years. What happens in your marriage," I added, "is between the two of you." Tyson finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "She's right, Zuri. About everything." She spun to face him, stunned. "You can't be serious. You're taking her side?" "There are no sides," he said quietly. "There's right and wrong. And what you did? It wasn't just wrong, it was calculated. It was betrayal." Her eyes welled up, her voice trembling. "Baby, please. I admit, I messed up. I was doing it for us, for our future. Your mom has more money than she'll ever need. And we were just trying to catch up. By forging documents?" Tyson's voice rose, years of suppressed frustration pouring out. "By plotting to have her declared mentally unfit so you could take everything? I read your notes, Zuri. The timeline. The estate plan. You weren't saving our marriage. You were preparing to throw me out, too." "That's not true," she cried. "Then explain the folder with divorce settlement research. Explain the spreadsheets detailing who gets what in a separation." Zuri's mouth opened, then closed again. No witty retort. No rehearsed excuse. For the first time, she had nothing to say. I rose to my feet, feeling a strength I hadn't touched in years. "You have 48 hours to decide," I said. "Sign the agreements, and we settle this privately. Quietly. Or I submit the fraud report and let the feds handle the rest." Zuri stared me down. "And if I refuse? If I call your bluff?" I smiled, but it wasn't the warm kind. "Go ahead and try. I ran a consulting firm for 3 decades. I've outnegotiated CEOs who would chew you up and floss with your spine. You're not nearly as terrifying as you think you are." Something in my voice broke through to her. Her rigid posture sagged. She looked around the room, really looked at it. The family photos she wasn't in. The warmth and comfort she hadn't built. The proof of a life built on love, not leverage. "This isn't over," she muttered at last. But her voice was hollow. "Empty." "Yes," I said. "It is. It ended the moment you decided to steal from me. You just didn't notice." Zuri snatched up her purse and stormed toward the door, but paused at the threshold, turning back one last time. "You'll regret this. Both of you. When you're old and alone in this house with no one left, you'll remember tonight." I looked her square in the eyes. "I've been alone for 3 years, Zuri. The only thing that's changed is, I don't have to fake it anymore." She slammed the door so hard the windows trembled. In the stillness that followed, Tyson and I stood in the wreckage of what used to be our family, just staring at each other. Mom, he said at last, voice raw. I'm so sorry. I should have seen it. I should have protected you. I walked over and took his hands in mine, the same hands I used to hold when he was just a scared little boy, lost in his nightmares. You were manipulated, sweetheart. By someone who's clearly had a lot of practice. She probably ran the same game in every relationship before yours. But I should have known better, he said. You're my mom. I should have trusted you. Grief makes us all vulnerable, I said quietly. When your dad passed, I was just as lost. I was so eager to be part of your new life, I ignored the warning signs. We both made mistakes. He pulled me into a hug, the kind of fierce, soul-deep hug we'd shared the day we buried his father. When he let go, his eyes were glassy, but his expression was resolute. What happens to us now? He asked. You and me? I looked at him, really looked. At some point tonight, the stranger I'd barely recognized these past few years had vanished. And my son, my real son, was back. The one who planted rosebushes with me when his father died. The one who called every Sunday during his freshman year. The one who'd once promised never to stop looking out for me. Now? I said. Now we start fresh. Just the two of us. Like it should have always been. He nodded, wiping at his eyes. And Zuri? Zuri will do what she always does. She'll bounce back, find her next target, and start the cycle again. But that's no longer our concern. The next morning, Tyson moved back into his old bedroom. 3 days later, the signed agreements showed up on my doorstep. No note, no apology, just paperwork. Within a week, packages started arriving. Designer heels. Statement jewelry. Boutique dresses. The glittering leftovers of Zuri's betrayal. All returned. She'd followed through, though, let's be honest, she hadn't exactly had a choice. 2 weeks later, the divorce was filed. Irreconcilable differences. She didn't contest it. Which told me everything I needed to know about how much our last conversation had shaken her. But the real victory wasn't in getting the money back, or the signed admissions of guilt. The real win was getting my son back. Rebuilding the bond that had been ripped away. And as I watched Tyson help me plant fresh roses in Harold's old garden, something clicked. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't fighting to win. It's walking away from a fight you were never meant to lose. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen making Sunday breakfast, for two. Something I hadn't done since Harold passed. Sunlight poured through the windows, which I'd finally gotten around to cleaning properly. The whole house felt alive again. Tyson shuffled in, hair messy from sleep, wearing the same worn college t-shirt he'd stubbornly kept since he was 20. For a moment, it felt like the last 3 years had just been some bad dream. Morning, Mom. Coffee smells amazing. Sit down, I said. Breakfast is just about ready. I plated the eggs and bacon, sneaking a look at him. He looked healthier. Brighter. He'd put some weight back on, and those deep stress lines were starting to fade. Any update from Jennifer about the last payment? He asked, settling into his chair. It came through yesterday. Final installment, I said, pouring him some orange juice, the way I always used to when he was a teen. Zuri's officially paid back every last cent. With interest. And the business account? Closed. Whitmore and Associates is officially history. I sat down across from him, feeling lighter than I had in years. Your dad would have been proud, I added. Of how we handled all of it. Tyson nodded, though I could still see that flicker of sadness cross his face at the mention of Zuri. The divorce had been finalized for 3 months now, but some wounds don't heal on a schedule. You heard from her at all? I asked. He sighed. A few texts in the beginning. She tried spinning it like you'd forced her to confess, claimed you manipulated her. But nothing for the past month. I think she finally got the message. I'd heard through the grapevine that Zuri had moved to California. Supposedly she was already engaged, to a man 3 decades older with a massive real estate portfolio. The cycle was repeating. Just like I'd said it would. But not our problem anymore. I've been thinking, I said, setting down my mug. I'm considering selling the house. Tyson's fork froze midair. Seriously? Why? It's just too much for one person. And honestly? These walls are heavy with memories. Some good, some not so good. I think it's time for something new. Where would you go? I smiled. That flutter of excitement was back, something I hadn't felt in years. I've been eyeing a condo near the waterfront. Big windows, gorgeous view of the harbor. Something simpler. More manageable. He grinned. That actually sounds perfect. You deserve to live somewhere that makes you excited to wake up. And what about you? I asked. Have you figured out your next step? Tyson had been staying with me since the separation. And while I loved having him here, I knew he needed more than this house could give. Actually, yeah, he said, putting down his fork. I got a job offer. A real one. Tell me. Morrison Consulting. Downtown. They want me to lead their new digital transformation team. It's the work I've always wanted. And the pay, he hesitated. Let's just say I can finally afford a place of my own. That's wonderful, sweetheart, I said, beaming. When would you start? Next month, if I accept. But I wanted to make sure you'd be okay on your own first. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Tyson, I've been taking care of myself for 65 years. I think I can manage a little longer. I know, he said, smiling. After everything with Zuri, I worry about leaving you vulnerable. To what? I chuckled. Another scheming daughter-in-law? He laughed too, really laughed, and it felt good. Next woman I bring home, he said, she's gonna have to survive the mom test. And I mean the full version. No shortcuts. Good, I said. Because next time I'm not pulling any punches. He grinned. The next one better know she's dating the son of a woman who's an unstoppable force of nature. I raised my coffee. Damn right. After breakfast, we drove over to the waterfront condo I'd been thinking about. A friendly real estate agent named Sarah greeted us in the lobby of an old warehouse that had been converted into upscale apartments. This is the one I mentioned, she said as she led us toward the elevator. 10th floor, corner unit, with amazing views. When she swung the door open, I heard Tyson catch his breath sharply. The space was breathtaking. Open-plan living, a sleek modern kitchen, warm hardwood floors, and huge windows framing the harbor like a living painting. Mom, this is unreal, Tyson said, walking right up to the glass. Look at that. I joined him, watching sailboats glide over the shimmering blue water like white birds in flight. For the first time in years, I could actually see myself living somewhere new, somewhere truly my own. The building's secure, Sarah added. There's a gym, a rooftop garden, and concierge services. It's especially popular with professional women who want luxury living without the hassle of a house. What about the HOA fees? I asked. Harold had drilled into me the importance of knowing all the hidden costs. Very reasonable, she replied. Around $400 a month covers utilities except internet and cable, plus all amenities. I wandered through the bedroom, admiring the walk-in closet and spa-like bathroom. Everything was sleek, modern, and efficient, nothing like the sprawling house where I'd raised Tyson, but exactly what I wanted. I'll take it, I said. Sarah blinked. Don't you want to see a few other units? Take a few days to decide. I've been thinking about this for months, I told her. This is perfect. 3 weeks later, I signed the paperwork. 2 weeks after that, the moving trucks rolled up to my old house. Tyson had taken some time off from his new job to help with the move, and we spent the days side by side, sorting through 40 years of memories. What about this one? He asked, holding up a photo from his high school graduation. Zuri had insisted on taking it, and cut me partly out of the frame so she could stand closer to Tyson. Trash, I said immediately. And this one? A family photo from last Christmas. Everyone smiling stiffly around the tree. Trash, I repeated. Mom, you're throwing away everything that has Zuri in it. Exactly. I don't want reminders of someone who tried to tear our family apart. He was quiet for a moment, then held up another photo, just the two of us at Harold's grave on the first anniversary of his death. What about this one? I took it from him, studying our faces. We looked lost, grief-stricken, but together. Real. Unlike any photo that included Zuri. That one goes in my bedroom. By evening, the house was empty except for a few pieces of furniture the new owners had agreed to keep. I stood in the living room, the room where I'd spent so many evenings with Harold, where I'd raised my son, and where I'd been slowly diminished by a woman who saw me as nothing but an obstacle. Any regrets? Tyson asked, joining me in the doorway. None, I said, meaning it with every fiber of my being. The condo felt like a sanctuary. Every item in it had been chosen by me, for me. No one else's tastes or needs to consider. I decorated simply but tastefully, with art I loved and furniture that was cozy rather than flashy. That first evening, I settled on my new sofa with a glass of wine, watching the sunset paint the harbor in shades of gold and pink. My phone buzzed. A text from Tyson. How's first night at the new place? I typed back. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. Dinner Sunday. Found a great little Italian spot. It's a date, but I'm picking up the tab. I want to celebrate my freedom. 3 months into this new chapter, I did something I hadn't done in decades. I joined a book club, then a photography class, then a walking group that met every Tuesday morning along the waterfront. I was making friends again. Real friends who saw me as Agatha the person, not just Agatha the mother, or Agatha the victim. Women with their own stories, their own achievements, their own outlooks on life. One evening, returning from book club, I found Tyson waiting in the lobby with a bottle of champagne and a huge smile. What are we celebrating? I asked. My promotion, he said, your freedom, and the fact that we both survived the worst thing to ever happen to our family, and came out stronger. We went up to my condo, popped the cork, and watched the city lights flicker across the water. I love you, Mom, he said suddenly. I'm sorry it took me so long to find my way back to who I really am. I love you too, sweetheart. And I'm not sorry about any of it. Really? Not even the stolen money? Not even that, I said. Because if Zuri hadn't gotten greedy, if she hadn't made that crucial mistake with the business account, she might have succeeded. Taken power of attorney, seized control of everything, maybe even had me declared incompetent. I sipped my champagne, feeling the bubbles dance on my tongue. But instead, she taught me how strong I really am. That I don't have to settle for scraps of affection from people who don't truly care. That I can build a life that's entirely my own. So, what's next? I smiled, looking out over the harbor where boats drifted freely, untethered, heading wherever they pleased. Whatever I want. For the first time in my adult life, whatever I want. And for the first time in years, that felt like the greatest gift of all. Now I want to hear from you, who've been listening to my story. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Have you ever faced something similar? Comment below. And while you're here, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and I promise, they'll surprise you. Thank you for watching all the way through.